On December 17, 2012, a team of Egyptian and German researchers published the results of a CT scan that solved a 3,000 years old murder. Pharaoh Ramesses III, one of the most powerful kings Egypt ever produced, had not simply died in his sleep the way his own priest's records implied. Someone had cut his throat open nearly to the spine. For 3,000 years, official Egyptian history had no room for a fact like that. A pharaoh was a god on earth, and gods were not supposed to die of anything. They simply completed their journey and joined Osiris, their names carried forward in temple inscriptions that never once admitted weakness, illness, or violence. What actually killed each of these kings survived, if it survived at all, only in their bones. Modern forensics has spent the last century quietly prying open that silence, pharaoh by pharaoh. And the truth is rarely the one carved into the stone. Why the record went silent? The silence was not an accident of history. It was policy. Egyptian kingship rested on the idea that the pharaoh was Horus incarnate while he lived and Osiris once he died. A transition described in temple and tomb texts as a journey rather than an ending. To admit that a king had been murdered, or had wasted away from disease, or had simply grown too frail to rule, was to admit that the divine order itself had failed. So the inscriptions describe kings who went to their horizon or joined the sun, language that could mean anything from old age to a knife in the dark, and usually meant whichever the ruling family needed it to mean. This was not a society ignorant of the body. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, a surgical text copied around 1600 BCE from a source centuries older, catalogs skull fractures, spinal injuries, and battlefield wounds with a clinical precision that would not look out of place in a modern trauma manual. Egyptian physicians could describe exactly how a man died. They were simply never permitted to describe how a king did. Not in writing, meant to last. Mummification itself became part of the cover story. Embalmers routinely packed wounds with linen, resin, and wax before wrapping a body, smoothing over the very injuries a modern pathologist would most want to see. More than one royal mummy examined in the 21st century turned out to be hiding damage its own funerary priests had gone to considerable trouble to disguise. What survived instead of an honest record were the bodies themselves. And bodies do not lie the way inscriptions do. Every fracture, every abscess, every blade mark stays fixed in the bone long after the priests who buried it are gone. Which is why the real biography of a pharaoh's death usually begins centuries later, on an X-ray table rather than a temple wall. The first king and the first legend. The earliest pharaoh whose death anyone claimed to know anything about is also the least reliable case in this entire account. Menes, credited with uniting Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BCE and possibly the same figure as the historical King Narmer, appears in the writings of the priest Manetho, composed some 2,800 years after the fact, with a single, strange detail attached to his reign. He was carried off and killed by a hippopotamus. No contemporary inscription confirms it. No burial record survives to check it against. It may be a folk memory, a moral parable about the god Seth's animal, or a simple confusion of names compounded over 30 centuries of retelling. It survives at all only because Manetho wrote it down, and it sets the pattern that would repeat for the next 3,000 years. The more famous the king, the murkier the actual cause of death becomes, buried under myth, propaganda, or simple silence. The Old Kingdom's buried suspicions: Djoser, Sneferu, and Khufu. The builders who raised the Old Kingdom's great stone monuments across the 3rd and 4th dynasties all died in circumstances the record treats as unremarkable. Old age, most likely. Though their tombs were robbed so thoroughly in antiquity that even their bodies never survived to be examined. Khufu's case is the strangest of the three precisely because so little is left to check. When his burial chamber inside the Great Pyramid was finally forced open in the 9th century CE, it was already empty. Its granite sarcophagus present, but its lid broken and its contents gone, leaving no body at all for any future scientist to question. Whatever killed the builder of the largest tomb ever raised for a single man is a question with no evidence left to answer it. The silence breaks with Teti, founder of the 6th dynasty around 2345 BCE. Manetho states flatly that Teti was murdered by his own bodyguards. No inscription from Teti's own time admits any such thing, and Manetho was writing over 2,000 years after the assassination he describes, which is reason enough for caution. But the circumstantial evidence lines up in an unsettling way. Egyptologist Naguib Kanawati has pointed out that the number of royal bodyguards recorded at court expanded sharply during Teti's reign. Exactly the kind of institutional response a palace makes after, not before, a security failure. Teti's own pyramid complex was left unfinished at Saqqara, and the succession that followed him is confused enough in the record to suggest a court in crisis rather than a smooth transfer of power. That crisis, whatever its cause, resolved into one of the strangest reigns in Egyptian history. Pepi II, who came to the throne as a child around 2278 BCE, and, according to the Turin King list and Manetho's own tally, ruled for roughly 94 years, the longest reign of any monarch in recorded history, if the number is accurate. Some modern historians suspect a scribal error inflated 64 years into 94, and the true figure may never be settled. What is not in dispute is the effect. A king who outlived his own heirs, his own courtiers, and very possibly his own competence, left the machinery of the Egyptian state to provincial governors who had spent decades governing without real oversight from the top. When Pepi II finally died, whether at 84 or 98, the Old Kingdom did not long survive him. Within a generation, Egypt fractured into the First Intermediate Period, and a single king's refusal to die on any reasonable timetable is one of the reasons historians point to for why a king killed in his own bed. Order returned with the 12th dynasty and King Amenemhat I, who seized the throne around 1991 BCE and spent his reign consolidating a fractured Egypt back into one state. His death is the single best documented royal assassination in all of pharaonic history, not because an investigator wrote it up, but because the king himself, or a scribe writing in his voice after the fact, did. The Instructions of Amenemhat, a text composed for his son and successor, Seqenenre I, describes the murder from the victim's own perspective. It happened at night, in the king's private chambers, while Seqenenre was away leading a military campaign. And the attackers came from inside the palace itself, likely from within the royal harem. It was after supper, when night had fallen, and I had spent an hour of happiness. The text recalls, before the king describes waking to violence with no guards near enough to help. Whether Amenemhat actually dictated these words or Seqenenre commissioned them afterward to justify tightening his own grip on the throne is debated among Egyptologists. What is not debated is the message Seqenenre took from his father's death. He ruled through a lengthy co-regency with his own son, a practice that would recur through the 12th dynasty specifically to avoid the vulnerable gap in power that had gotten Amenemhat killed. The caution paid off for generations. Seqenenre III, who ruled from around 1878 to 1839 BCE, campaigned deep into Nubia and died of what the record simply does not specify, though his statues offer their own quiet testimony. Unlike the serene, idealized faces carved for most Egyptian kings. Seqenenre III's portraits show a heavy-lidded, deeply lined face. An image scholars have long read as a deliberate choice to depict the weight and exhaustion of command rather than evidence of any specific illness. Whatever finally killed him. It was not a blade in the dark. The co-regency system his great-grandfather's murder had inspired held the 12th dynasty together for another century before the throne began passing through weaker hands again. Executed on the battlefield. By the 17th dynasty, Egypt had fractured again, this time under foreign occupation. The Hyksos, a Near Eastern dynasty of rulers, controlled the Nile Delta from their stronghold at Avaris, while native Egyptian kings governed a shrunken kingdom from Thebes in the south. Seqenenre Tao, who ruled Thebes around 1558 BCE, is remembered as the king who opened the war to expel them, and his mummy is the most violently eloquent death mask that has survived from ancient Egypt. A CT scan conducted in 2021 by Sahar Salim and Zahi Hawass found what earlier, cruder examinations had missed. A deep axe wound across his forehead, stab marks around his eyes and cheeks, and a blow to the base of his skull, likely delivered by a spear or dagger. All inflicted by at least 2 different weapons from 2 different angles. His hands showed no defensive wounds at all, a detail the researchers read as evidence that they had been bound behind his back when the blows landed. Seqenenre Tao was not killed in the chaos of open combat. He was captured, restrained, and executed. And even then, the cover-up began almost immediately. His embalmers packed the worst of the head wounds with linen and resin before wrapping him, disguising the damage well enough that early 20th century examinations of the mummy missed most of it entirely. It took a CT scanner nearly 100 years later to see past what Bronze Age priests had deliberately hidden. His son Kamosi picked up the war within the year, and Kamosi's brother Ahmose finished it, driving the Hyksos out of Egypt entirely and founding the 18th dynasty, the opening act of the new kingdom, built directly on top of his father's mutilated corpse, the Golden Age's quiet casualties. The new kingdom that followed produced Egypt's most famous rulers, and its forensic record is, if anything, stranger than the violence that founded it. Thutmose II, Hatshepsut's husband and half-brother, died first, in his early 30s, after a reign historians still struggle to characterize as much more than a placeholder between 2 more dominant figures. His mummy, unwrapped in 1886, is covered in scars and lesions consistent with a chronic skin disease. Though whether the condition killed him outright or simply marked years of declining health before some final, unrecorded illness is impossible to say from the evidence alone. What happened to his body centuries after burial is easier to document than what killed him in the first place. Tomb robbers hacked off both arms at the shoulder and elbow, searching for jewelry sealed inside the wrappings, cut his chest and abdomen open with an axe, and severed one leg entirely, damage inflicted not by an assassin, but by looters working long after the man himself was already gone. Hatshepsut, who ruled as pharaoh in her own right from around 1479 to 1458 BCE, vanished from the historical record so completely after her death that her mummy went unidentified for over a century after its discovery. In 2007, Zahi Hawass's team matched a loose molar tooth found in a small wooden box, bearing her name to the exact gap in the jaw of a mummy long catalogued simply as KV60A. CT scans of that mummy revealed a woman who had died in her 50s, overweight, diabetic, and riddled with bone metastases consistent with cancer. A jar of skin lotion found among her belongings, analyzed decades later, was found to contain benzopyrene, a carcinogenic compound. Some historians now suspect Hatshepsut spent years unknowingly poisoning herself while treating a chronic skin condition that ran in her family. The identification remains debated among specialists over the strength of the DNA evidence. One more entry in a very long list of Egyptian royal deaths that modern science can narrow, but not always close. Her successor's line runs through one of the most argued over deaths in the ancient world, Akhenaten, the pharaoh who briefly abolished Egypt's traditional gods in favor of the sun disk Aten and moved the capital to a city built for the purpose. He died around 1336 BCE, and even the location of his body is disputed. A badly damaged mummy recovered from tomb KV55 has been proposed as his remains, though the skeleton's age at death and the identification itself remain genuinely contested among Egyptologists, with some evidence pointing instead to his shadowy successor, Seqenenre. What toppled the Amarna experiment after Akhenaten's death is clearer than what killed him. Within a decade, the old gods were restored, his monuments defaced, and his name struck from the later king lists as though the entire episode had been a mistake to be erased rather than a reign to be remembered. His son inherited a kingdom in the middle of that correction and did not live to see it finished. Tutankhamun died around 1324 BCE at roughly 19 years old, and a 2010 genetic and CT study led by Hawas's team, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, found a body working against itself. A cleft palate, a club foot, Kohler's disease slowly destroying the bones of his left foot, and DNA from at least one strain of malaria parasite in his tissue. The same study confirmed what tomb inscriptions had only hinted at. Tutankhamun's parents were siblings, and the genetic cost of that union likely compounded every other ailment he carried. The immediate trigger for his death may have been a broken leg, a fracture visible on CT scans, which combined with the malaria infection to overwhelm a body that had probably needed a cane to walk since childhood. He left no heir, and the throne passed in quick and unstable succession to his elderly vizier I, and then to the general Horemheb, neither one connected to the royal bloodline by birth. The clearest possible sign that the 18th dynasty's ruling family had, quite literally, run out of blood to pass the crown through. The long reign and the murdered king. Ramesses II, who took the throne in 1279 BCE and held it for 67 years, represents the opposite extreme. A death so unremarkable that historians can say almost nothing definite about it, beyond the evidence of decades of ordinary human decline. His mummy, examined repeatedly across the 20th century and most recently by Salim's team, shows severe dental abscesses, worn teeth, arthritis, and a spine curved from what was likely years of a hunched, pain-limited posture in old age. In 1976, the mummy was flown to Paris for treatment after a fungal infestation was discovered, actively degrading the tissue. And French conservators spent months halting the decay. The episode says less about any mysteries surrounding his death than about how carefully modern Egypt has chosen to preserve the evidence of a king who, by all indications, simply outlived his own body. His grandson's grandson had no such peaceful end. Ramesses III, whose death opened this account, ruled from 1186 to 1155 BCE and was murdered in a conspiracy hatched inside his own harem. The Judicial Papyrus of Turin, a trial record that survived the millennia intact, names Queen Tai as the plot's architect, working to clear the throne for her son Pentawere over the legitimate heir. The papyrus lists dozens of conspirators, guards, officials, harem women, even a magician accused of supplying poison and wax figures for ritual cursing, and records their sentences. Several of them execution or forced suicide. What the papyrus never states outright is whether the plot actually succeeded in killing the king. And for decades, some historians assumed Ramesses III had survived the attempt only to die of unrelated causes weeks later. The 2012 CT scan closed that question permanently. The wound in his throat was fatal, inflicted with a blade sharp enough and a cut deep enough that he could not have lived more than minutes afterward. A second mummy, catalogued for over a century only as Unknown Man Ea, was found through genetic testing to share a father with Ramesses III. His body was never properly embalmed at all, wrapped instead in an uncured goatskin considered ritually unclean. And his face is frozen in a wide-mouthed contortion that earned him the nickname the Screaming Mummy, long before anyone knew who he was. Researchers now read that expression, along with the absence of any organ removal or preservation ritual, as the marks of a man buried in disgrace rather than a natural death. Pointing toward Pentawere himself, likely forced to take his own life as punishment for the murder his mother orchestrated. The last native kings. By the time Egypt's 26th dynasty gave way to Persian conquest in 525 BCE, the pattern of violent transition was well established. Psamtik III, who had ruled for less than a year when the Persian king Cambyses II invaded, was defeated at Pelusium and initially spared, according to the historian Herodotus, treated by his conquerors with something close to respect. That mercy did not last. When Psamtik III was caught organizing a rebellion against Persian rule soon afterward, Cambyses had him executed, closing the dynasty on a note of open violence rather than the studied silence earlier kings had managed. The pattern repeated one final time at the very end of native rule. Nectanebo II, who came to the throne in 360 BCE, spent his reign fortifying Egypt's borders against exactly the invasion that eventually broke him. He had built forts along the Mediterranean coast, entrenched camps at every river mouth, and fielded an army reinforced by tens of thousands of Greek mercenaries. A defense substantial enough that Artaxerxes III's first attempt to break it in 351 BCE failed outright. The second attempt, in 343 BCE, succeeded largely through betrayal rather than force. Mentor of Rhodes, a Greek commander who had once fought for Nectanebo, switched sides and helped the Persian army find the weaknesses in defenses he himself had helped design. With his own general's knowledge turned against him, the last native-born pharaoh of Egypt fled south, first to Upper Egypt and then into Nubia, where a local king granted him refuge. What happened to him after that is not recorded anywhere. He simply disappears from history, the final native ruler of a 3,000-year monarchy, vanishing into a silence even more complete than the one Egyptian scribes usually imposed on their kings. A much later, thoroughly unreliable legend claims he resurfaced in Macedon, disguised as a magician, and fathered Alexander the Great on the wife of Philip II, a story with no serious historical support, but one that captures how badly later generations wanted an ending for a king the record simply refused to provide. The line of Egyptian monarchy finally reached its end nearly 3 centuries after Nectanebo vanished. Cleopatra VII, the last reigning ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, took her own life in August of 30 BCE after Octavian's forces took Alexandria, rather than be paraded through Rome as a captive. Roman writers disagree even on the method. Plutarch, Strabo, and Cassius Dio variously describe an asp smuggled in a basket of figs, a poisoned hairpin, or a toxic ointment. And modern toxicologists have pointed out that an Egyptian cobra bite is a slow and uncertain way to guarantee death, casting doubt on the most famous version of the story. Some historians go further still, suggesting Octavian may have pressured her towards suicide precisely because a queen who died by her own hand made for a cleaner political story than one he had visibly executed. But Cleopatra was not, strictly speaking, the last pharaoh. That distinction belongs to her 17-year-old son Caesarion, crowned co-ruler years earlier, and after his mother's death, the last living claimant to a throne that had passed from king to king for 3,000 years. Octavian had him hunted down and killed within days, reportedly on the advice of a philosopher who told him that having more than one Caesar alive in the world was not a good idea. Unlike almost every death in this account, Caesarian's requires no CT scanner, no genetic test, no centuries of forensic guesswork to confirm. It is the one royal death in 3,000 years of Egyptian history that was never hidden, never mythologized, and never in any real doubt, recorded openly by the men who ordered it the same day it happened. The last native kings. The scale of the problem that eventually forced that decision is preserved in an unusually candid set of court documents. Under Ramesses IX, around 1110 BCE, officials put named men on trial for breaking into royal and noble tombs across the Theban necropolis, and the surviving record, now known as the Papyrus Abbot, describes a mayor named Pacer accusing his rival Pharaoh of failing to protect the tombs under his jurisdiction. One government official trying to pin a corruption scandal on another, while the graves of Egypt's own kings were actively being emptied around them. None of these bodies would have survived to be scanned at all if not for the act of institutional panic that followed soon after. By the 21st dynasty, tomb robbery in the Valley of the Kings had become so severe and the state so broke that the priesthood at Thebes made a drastic decision. Rather than continue defending dozens of individually plundered royal tombs, they gathered the mummies of Egypt's greatest kings, Seqenenre Tao, Ahmose, the Thutmoside pharaohs, Seti Ferd, both Ramesses II and Ramesses III among them, stripped many of their remaining jewelry in the process, rewrapped what was left, and hid the entire collection together in a single unmarked shaft near Deir el-Bahari. It stayed sealed and unknown to the outside world for close to 3,000 years, until a local family began quietly selling artifacts traceable to it on the Luxor antiquities market in the 1870s. And Egyptian and European investigators traced the leak back to the tomb itself in 1881. More than 50 royal mummies came out of that single shaft in the space of 2 days. Without that one act of ancient triage, half the deaths this account describes would have no body left to examine at all. What finally cracked open this 3,000-year pattern of silence was not a lost text, but a piece of medical equipment. The Egyptian Mummy Project, launched under Zahi Hawass in the early 2000s, ran CT scans and DNA tests across dozens of royal mummies held in Cairo, turning tombs that had been sealed to protect a king's secrets into evidence rooms that finally exposed them. Ramesses III's throat, Seqenenre Tao's bound wrists, Tutankhamun's malformed foot, Hatshepsut's cancer. All of it sat inside linen wrappings for 3,000 years, waiting on a radiologist rather than a scribe to finally tell the truth. Dozens of royal mummies in Egyptian collections still have not been comprehensively scanned, and the identifications that have been made continue to draw challenges from specialists who want stronger genetic confirmation before they are treated as settled. Every inscription that once declared a king had simply gone to his horizon is still, in a real sense, an open case file. The stone said the pharaohs never died. Their bones have spent 3,000 years quietly proving otherwise, and there is no reason to think the last of those corrections has been made yet.